Alright, everybody, this is going to be your introduction to the roots of George Orwell's Animal Farm. And before we start the book, you have to know minimum these two words, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Okay? So if I tell you to mark it down on your notes, mark it down on your notes. And you're going to be on page 9 of your notes. Ready? Go. Alright, first thing you need. The time is the early 1800s. Write that down. Okay? And the place is in Europe. Europa. And there are two major characters that you need to fill in as well. The two groups are those who own the factories, the people who have all the power and the money, and those who work in the factories. Those are the have-nots. So who would you rather be? Obviously, you'd rather be the owners because the workers were doing all the work and getting very little pay for it. Okay? So pause it if you get behind, blah, 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 and then restart if you need to keep going. Next part. Alright. This is the exposition of our big story that we're getting into. And the real story is that this all started with the Industrial Revolution. That's your next one. You have to understand the Industrial Revolution is when we went from like making things by hand to pretty much machines doing all the work, and then the people just being behind the machines or fixing the machines, but the machines doing all the work. Now the four major advances of the Industrial Revolution were this. Power. We start using coal and water to use large objects. That makes it quite a bit easier. Okay? Let's see. Agriculture. Cotton replaces wool for cloth and material. There you go. Better cloth. Transportation. We have better roads. We get new railroads, so things are moving faster and more smoothly. And finally, factories. Again, machines are now doing the strong work. And I believe that's what goes in the next 3 blanks, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check the next slide. Nope. I messed up. That's just background knowledge. The next one is where your next stuff is. Okay? Here you go. Next part of your notes. 3 main results. Because everything changes and goes machinized, which isn't a real word, there are 3 things that happen. Okay? Women and children become factory workers. So there you go. Don't know how you feel about that. We'll get to that. There's a weaker workforce that's less able to take care of itself. Not that women and children are weak, but you have to understand in a male-driven society and world at this time, women and children did not have rights. So they were a weaker workforce and were not able to take care of themselves. Now finally, we have this thing called urbanization. You have to know this. That means that all the workers leave the country and move to the cities because that's where the jobs are. The cities get all large and filled with filth and crime, disgusting. And then the wealthy people move out to the country because they don't want to be around that anymore. So that's urbanization. Cities become big because the workers move in. Cities become big and dirty, and then the wealthy people move somewhere else. So these 3 should now be on your notes. Okay? Alright, let's get ready for the next part. Initiating event. Initiating event. The birth of capitalism. Very important word. Okay, that's your next blank. Capitalism. Capitalism is the idea that a nation's economy must run without interference from the government. So trade and industry are controlled by the private owners. So let's say that you want to raise gas to $50 quadrillion a gallon. Capitalism would say that the government can't say, no, that's wrong, because in a capitalist society, the government cannot interfere in money. And this is the idea that's birthed. Okay? Next part. Now there's conflict here. A couple reasons why this creates conflict. First, without the government interfering, there are no rules regarding minimum wage or the hours that people could work. So there's your first one. You couldn't control how much money you made or how many hours you worked. So imagine working 50 bajillion hours a week for like 2 cents. It wasn't quite that bad, but you get the idea. Next, the factory owners set long hours and low wages. Okay? I wouldn't write that one down. I'd write down the next one. The factory owners get really, really rich, and then they bribe the government to stay out of the way. That's sad. That's corruption. Next one. There's no social mobility. I'd write this one down. You can't move. If you're born poor, guess what? You're going to work if you're lucky, and then you're going to die poor. That's social mobility, and it did not exist. No social mobility. And so the wealth is actually controlled by a very, very small percentage of the population. Finally, poverty skyrockets. There are just tons and tons of poor people, and they go from being hopeless, or this is so sad, to resentful, which is, now I'm mad. Now we've got a problem. You can see kind of the tension building and bubbling under the surface. Make sure you have 3 of those, please, for your notes. Now, let's get to the rising action. So what do you think is going to happen so far because of all this? That's right. What happens is this, or these, rather. So why don't you pick your favorites? The ones you think are the most significant. First, the factory conditions become very, very dangerous. Next, lawsuits. The government, lawsuits. People start to sue the factories and like, this isn't fair. But then the government comes back and says, we don't care. If you don't like it, don't work there. Another thing that happens is sabotage. People start messing and destroying the machines up on purpose to mess up the factories. But also there are riots against the factory owners. These crowds go nuts and start breaking stuff and all this stuff. Now, here's the problem. A lot of times in these riots, you get this deadly reaction from the factory owners. They'll pull out their guns or their clubs and kill people, and then the government steps in and says, well, that's the poor people's fault. The factories are just protecting their property. And that's a real problem because the government is siding with the wealthy. Okay, so pick your favorites, write those down at the bottom of page 9 and 1, 2, and 3, then get ready to go on. Finally, one more. The resentment against the factory owners actually turns into resentment against the government. Oh yeah, you get that? They used to hate the factory owners, but now they hate the government as well. Now, here's your climax. Turn to page 10 on your notes. Climax is this. As a result of this conflict, a group of German workers turned to this guy, Santa Claus. No, I'm just kidding. He looks like Santa Claus, but this is actually Karl Marx. That's what you write in. Now, pick out 3 facts. He was born in Germany, studies literature and philosophy, travels through Europe and observes the situation of the working class. He settles in London, writes political and economic philosophy. Now, this one you have to get. He is an idealist. I know that's on your quiz. An idealist is someone who sees a way to make the world better. Okay, they're like, oh, this is messed up. We can fix it. So think Mrs. Kuckelman. Give me an optimist. Oprah. There you go. Oprah, there's one. Give me another one. Karl Marx. Yeah, there's one. What about Gandhi? Okay, yeah, so all these people want to change the world and make it better. Thank you, Mrs. Kuckelman. Now, kind of odd because the work is funded by a wealthy friend, Frederick Engels. Kind of weird because the poor people turn to this guy who's pretty wealthy, or at least he has wealthy friends. That'd be like picking. That's like Americans saying we need a spokesperson, and then picking somebody who has not much knowledge about an American other than what they've studied. But still, Karl Marx is going to put a voice to this cause. Everybody's ticked off and they need somebody to tell about it. So here you go, Karl Marx. Climax. Let's see if this is on your notes. Oh yeah, this is the next line. The essay that he writes is called the Communist Manifesto. Now, you can break it down with your Greek and Latin roots, or I'll help you out here. Commune is the first part. That means a group of people who share all property and goods. Write that in. There's no private property. What's yours is mine, what's mine is yours. So I'm like, hey you, nice shoes. Take it. And the idea is that everybody is equal. That's supposed to prevent conflict. Manifesto is actually a public declaration of principles in philosophy. So think of manifesto as a fancy word for document, but I'd write down a public declaration. So think of it like the Manifesto of Independence instead of the Declaration of Independence. All right? You have Commune and Manifesto? All right, ready to go on. Next part. Marx looks at history and he says, all right, there's a problem with 2 classes, rather. The bourgeoisie. Remember that word? Now, the bourgeoisie are those who own the means of production, aka the employers, the haves, the upper class, the capitalists. And I'd probably write something like that down. The bourgeoisie are the capitalists, the powerful rich that own everything. That means, and you can kind of remember that, bourgeoisie. Doesn't that sound rich and powerful? There you go. That'll help you remember. Next part are the proletariat. So if these are the bourgeoisie or rich, that means the proletariat are the poor. That's right. See how the first 3 letters, P-R-O, mix those up and they almost spell poor. The proletariat are the poor, or those who own nothing, but those who work to produce for the rich. So the bourgeoisie are really only powerful because the proletariat. They're doing all the work and they get the money. Nice system if you're, that's right, bourgeoisie. Make sure you have those and let's go on. So Marx points his pen at because he's not really, yelling at him, he's writing it down. Marx accuses the bourgeoisie of, first, reducing the family relationship to something based on money. In other words, you'd have more kids so you can put more of your children in the factories and make more money. Next one, forcing nations to become dependent on one another through trade. Next one, replacing local businesses with large corporations. This seems to be what happens. The little shoemaker can't compete with the large shoemaking factory. And then forcing the world to accept their way or else collapse into poverty. Okay? All right. Finally, maybe not finally, destroying the worker's sense of individual identity and turning him or her into a machine. You got to understand that by doing this type of job day after day for so many hours for so little pay, you probably wouldn't feel like a human anymore. You'd feel like a machine, and that's what he's talking about. Oh, here's the final one. He actually blames the bourgeoisie, the rich, for being responsible for the sabotage, the riots, and all the violence, because ultimately he says it's your fault that these people are so ticked off. Now fix it.